December 23, 1944, Antwerp, Belgium. The cold was paralyzing. Frost clung to gun barrels, and the ground was hard as iron. In the distance, the city's cathedral tower cut a silhouette against a starless sky. Below, American gunners crouched inside sandbagged emplacements. Silent, disciplined, eyes fixed on the flickering glow of a radar scope. Then they heard it. Faint, rhythmic, mechanical. Engines, many of them. To the east, beyond the Meuse, German Heinkels and Junkers crossed the front lines, hidden by darkness and cloud. They carried high explosives meant for Antwerp's harbor, the critical supply artery feeding Patton's armored divisions in the Ardennes. The Luftwaffe believed the night was still theirs, but in the American positions, no one searched the skies. They read the air through radio waves. The SCR-584 radar pulsed in steady rhythm. Invisible fingers sweeping the sky, painting echoes of bombers still miles away. Each trace became a set of coordinates. Each coordinate became a solution inside the M9 director, a mechanical brain made of gears and gyroscopes. Orders passed quietly down the line. Range locked, fuse armed. The gunners pulled lanyards, without lights, without sights. The 90mm guns roared into darkness. Above, the German pilots never saw the threat, only the sudden bursts of white light that swallowed their wings, and the cold silence that followed. The unseen war had just begun. When World War II began in 1939, the night sky belonged to chance. Anti-aircraft gunners fought the darkness with nothing but their ears, searchlights, and instinct. Every barrage was guesswork, a storm of shells hoping to meet aircraft that were long gone by the time the explosions reached their altitude. The Luftwaffe had perfected this chaos. In 1940, during the Blitz over Britain, German bomber formations struck cities in darkness and fog, vanishing before gunners could even react. The human eye was too slow, the searchlight too narrow, the night too vast. But by 1941, something invisible was changing. From the quiet coastal stations of Britain's chain-home radar network, faint electronic echoes began to reveal what eyes could not. The principle was simple, almost poetic. Send a pulse of radio energy into the sky and listen for its reflection. If something metallic moved within that invisible field, the wave would return. Distance could be measured by time, direction by antenna. It was science transformed into survival. The British had pioneered the idea, but across the Atlantic, the Americans were listening carefully. At the U.S. Army Signal Corps laboratories in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, a group of engineers worked day and night on what they called radiolocation. To the public, it was still a mystery. To the military, it was the future. By 1942, the U.S. had its first generation of mobile radar sets, the SCR-268 and SCR-270. They were cumbersome, mounted on trucks with rotating dishes that hummed in the rain. They could detect aircraft tens of miles away, but accuracy was limited. Still, it was enough to give defenders warning, enough to turn surprise into preparation, and preparation changed everything. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor had exposed the limits of human observation. A single radar warning on Oahu had gone unheeded that morning in 1941. But by 1943, radar was no longer an experiment. It had become an integrated part of American air defense. Early warning stations linked to command posts, connected to batteries of 90mm anti-aircraft guns. The challenge remained. Knowing where the aircraft were was only half the battle. Hitting them, moving targets in darkness, at thousands of feet, demanded a union of precision and prediction that no human could calculate in time. That's when the engineers of Bell Laboratories introduced a mechanical mind. The M9 director, a hybrid of steel and mathematics. It took inputs from radar, bearing, altitude, speed, and translated them into precise gun orders. The M9 would aim, track, and anticipate where the target would be, not where it was. For the first time, radar didn't just see the enemy. It guided the guns that would destroy them. In testing, this new system achieved results that stunned even its creators. Targets that once required hundreds of shells could now be struck with a fraction of that number. The once blind night gunners were beginning to see through the invisible eyes of radar. By mid-1944, as Allied armies pushed across France, radar-guided anti-aircraft batteries became standard in the protection of ports, supply lines, and bridgeheads. Antwerp, the vital artery of Allied logistics, would soon depend entirely on this unseen shield. And in the winter to come, that shield would be tested like never before. By the summer of 1944, radar was no longer a secret. It was a weapon, and it traveled wherever the U.S. Army went. Across Normandy, as Sherman tanks rolled through shattered towns, long convoys followed, not of infantry, but of machinery, trailers carrying radar dishes, generators, cables, and strange mechanical devices guarded by soldiers in Signal Corps patches. Wherever American troops advanced, so did their eyes in the sky. At the heart of this system was the SCR-584 radar, a polished steel dome on a truck-mounted platform. Unlike earlier models, the SCR-584 could automatically track a moving aircraft once detected, following its path with near-human precision. It was designed not for warning, but for aiming. It was the brain behind America's anti-aircraft revolution. Paired with the M9 director, the SCR-584 could feed real-time positional data directly into the fire control system. The process was astonishingly advanced for its time. Radar beams tracked the enemy's altitude and velocity. The M9's gears computed lead angles and elevation. Servomotors adjusted the 90mm guns. Within seconds, a battery could lock onto a target invisible to the naked eye. The gunners didn't need to see anymore. The machine did that for them. This technology came from collaboration on a national scale. The Bell Telephone Laboratories, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's Radiation Laboratory, and Western Electric all contributed. Thousands of young American engineers, many barely out of college, pored over oscilloscopes and wiring diagrams instead of rifles. Their work would save countless lives on the front. When General Dwight D. Eisenhower received his first field demonstrations in England, he called it the single greatest improvement in anti-aircraft defense since the gun itself. But the Germans were watching too. By 1944, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self. Continuous daylight raids by American B-17s and B-24s had broken its fighter strength. To strike back, Germany turned to the night. Low-altitude raids by small bomber groups and the terrifying V-1 flying bombs aimed at London and Antwerp. The Allied lines glowed like targets on the map, and the Reich still had enough pilots willing to make the run. The Americans responded with science. They deployed entire radar-controlled anti-aircraft brigades around major ports and supply areas. Each site was carefully coordinated. Radar vans hidden under camouflage nets, gun batteries dug into concentric rings, and communication lines linking every unit. The new proximity fuse completed the transformation, a miniature radar inside the shell itself. Instead of detonating on contact or at a preset altitude, it sensed the target by radio echo, exploding at the optimal distance for maximum destruction. It was the deadliest marriage of physics and precision ever mounted on a gun. When the first radar-directed Hoey guns opened fire in Italy and southern France, Luftwaffe pilots were bewildered. There were no searchlights, no visible aim points, yet bombers exploded mid-air, as if the night itself had turned against them. Reports from downed German airmen told the same story. We were hit without warning. The sky was black, then red. By the time American radar units reached Belgium in late 1944, the system was fully operational, manned by well-trained crews and guarded by strict secrecy. Antwerp, the beating heart of Allied logistics, became their proving ground. Because soon, the Luftwaffe would come. And this time, they would meet an enemy they couldn't see. The beauty of radar-directed fire was in its rhythm. To an observer, the system looked like chaos. Cables, humming trailers, spinning antennas, men shouting over static. But inside that apparent confusion was one of the most advanced combat networks ever built. Every click, every rotation, every burst of static had purpose. The centerpiece was the SCR-584 radar, a 10-centimeter microwave tracking set capable of locking onto a single aircraft in motion. It could follow a bomber automatically once detected, keeping the antenna aimed precisely on target even as it maneuvered. The reflected signal, a faint pulse returning from the metal skin of the enemy aircraft, gave distance, direction, and elevation. Data once measured by sight and instinct, now measured by electrons and time. Beside the radar van sat the M9 gun director, built by Bell Labs and Western Electric. Its interior looked like something from a future war. Rows of gears, rotating cams, servo mechanisms, and dials spinning in calculated harmony. The radar operator fed it numbers, range, azimuth, velocity, and the M9 computed firing solutions faster than any human brain could. The result? Exact angles for each gun to point, precise elevation, and fuse timing, updated every second. That information traveled through cable lines to 4 or more 90mm anti-aircraft guns, each weighing nearly 9 tons, their long barrels trained skyward. The entire battery operated as one mechanical organism, a radar-guided orchestra where the gunners were musicians and the signal the conductor. When the radar beam moved, the guns turned automatically to follow. The process, once manual and exhausting, had become semi-automatic. In older systems, a gunner might track visually, adjusting by eye for speed, wind, and delay. At night, that was almost impossible. But radar gave them a new kind of vision, a sixth sense that reached through fog, rain, and darkness. A single battery could engage multiple aircraft in succession, firing into complete blackness and still achieve hits. To the Luftwaffe, it seemed supernatural. To American engineers, it was just mathematics brought to life. Then came the proximity fuse, the true revolution within the revolution. Developed under extreme secrecy by the National Defense Research Committee, the proximity fuse contained a miniature radio transmitter and receiver inside each shell. As it neared a target, the reflected radio wave altered the signal, triggering detonation at the exact moment of lethal proximity. For the first time, the weapon could sense its prey. Before proximity fuses, anti-aircraft shells relied on time fuses, set manually by guesswork, often wasting hundreds of rounds. Now, the shell itself knew when to explode. It changed the mathematics of defense completely. In tests, radar-directed 90mm guns using proximity-fused shells were 10 times more effective than visual fire. A formation that once might escape untouched could now be torn apart before crossing the defensive line. But technology alone wasn't enough. The system demanded discipline. Each radar operator, director, crewman, and gunner had to work in perfect timing. Training took months. Instructors drilled soldiers not only to operate the machinery, but to trust it. Radar wasn't visible. Its accuracy couldn't be seen, only believed. For the men who grew up sighting rifles by eye, that required faith in science as much as in command. In Antwerp, those lessons would soon be tested in combat. The German bombers would come under the cover of night and weather, confident the darkness would protect them. as it always had. But the Americans were now fighting with invisible eyes and mechanical precision. And when the first signals appeared on the radar scopes, that invisible orchestra would begin to play. To the men inside the American radar batteries, the war felt both close and distant. They fought enemies they could never see. There were no silhouettes of planes against the moon, no tracer arcs cutting through the dark. Only the quiet pulse of the radar scope, a heartbeat of green light sweeping across a round glass screen. Each operator learned to read that pulse as a language. A faint moving echo at 30 miles meant bombers climbing. A split trace at 20 meant formation spread. When the echo brightened, the tension in the van thickened. It meant the enemy was coming directly toward them. Radar warfare was cold, methodical, and intimate in its own way. The operator's eyes never left the trace. The M9 crew called out numbers that sounded like coordinates from another world. The gun crews waited for orders, feeling the vibration of motors as the barrels shifted to match the invisible data. When the command, "Fire," came, the sound was immediate and physical. The ground trembled as the first 90mm shell leapt upward. The radar operator didn't look away. He watched the screen to see if the echo changed, if the reflection faded, if the target vanished. That was their only confirmation. A disappearance of light on glass that meant a crew of men was falling from the sky. For the Germans, it was something else entirely. Luftwaffe bomber crews flying night missions in late 1944 reported a new kind of terror. The feeling of being hunted by an unseen force. They called it Todesfeld, the field of death. At first, they thought the Americans had perfected sound ranging or new spotlights. But even in total darkness, even through cloud and rain, the flak found them. Bombers exploded without warning. Formation leaders vanished from view. Radio calls were filled with confusion. No visual contact. Heavy fire. "I can't see the flashes." Pilots described shells detonating at precise altitude, as if someone had measured their flight path down to the meter. In one after-action report recovered from a downed Junkers crew near Liège, the surviving radio man wrote, "We saw nothing." The air itself seemed to explode. The shock was not only tactical, it was psychological. For years, the Luftwaffe had dominated the night sky with its Kampfgeschwader bomber wings. The darkness had been their ally. But by late 1944, darkness betrayed them. Every advantage they once held, stealth, surprise, invisibility, had been taken away by a technology they couldn't detect or jam effectively. Even those who survived described returning to base shaken, their confidence eroding after each mission. Some called the new American defense blind fire, but it was anything but blind. It was precision without sight. On the American side, the crews worked in a constant state of exhaustion and readiness. Radar units rarely slept. The operators rotated through night shifts, the droning hum of generators their only soundtrack. Between attacks, they maintained their equipment obsessively, cleaning tubes, calibrating antennas, replacing fuses, because a single malfunction could mean disaster for the city they guarded. And yet, for all the cold machinery, there was pride. Each confirmed kill was not celebration, but relief. Proof that their invisible defense worked, that their science and discipline had saved thousands on the ground below. The radar gunners were not frontline heroes. Few ever saw the planes they destroyed. But they were the quiet guardians of the Allied advance, fighting a war waged by reflection, timing, and faith in unseen signals. That faith would soon be tested to its limit. In the skies over Antwerp and Liège, when the Luftwaffe made its final desperate attempt to break the Allied supply lifeline. December 24, 1944, Antwerp, Belgium. It was Christmas Eve. But no one in the city celebrated. For 3 nights, the Luftwaffe had returned. A ghostly procession of bombers slipping through the clouds, searching for the docks, the bridges, the lifeline of the Allied armies fighting in the Ardennes. General Eisenhower had called Antwerp the heart of the Allied supply. If it stopped beating, Patton's tanks would starve, Montgomery's lines would falter, and the German counteroffensive might yet succeed. The Luftwaffe sent everything it had left. Heinkel He 100 Wallens, Junkers Ju 88s, and Dornier Do 217s, many piloted by veterans who had once bombed London or Stalingrad. They came low and fast, using darkness and fog to hide from Allied fighters. The Americans knew they were coming. Radar had seen them. In the fields outside Antwerp, the 1st Anti-Aircraft Artillery Group, part of the U.S. 9th Army, stood ready. Dozens of 90mm guns waited in concentric circles around the city, each battery linked by field telephone, each radar van humming in the dark. On the scopes, faint echoes began to bloom. First 1, then 5, then 20. Targets approaching from the east. Altitude 15,000 feet, came the calm report. The operators dialed in the numbers. The M9 directors spun to life, servos whining as they transmitted firing data to the guns. In seconds, the heavy barrels tilted skyward in perfect synchronization. There were no searchlights, no tracer rounds, only silence, then thunder. The first salvo left the ground with a synchronized roar. Dozens of shells streaked upward, unseen, their internal radar fuses waiting for a reflected signal. Seconds later, the night sky erupted in white flashes. To the German crews, it felt as if they had flown into an invisible wall. Explosions surrounded them, shrapnel tearing through wings and fuselages. Pilots veered instinctively, but the pattern followed. Radar tracking every movement. Bombers fell in burning arcs over the Scheldt River. Some never released their payloads. Others jettisoned bombs blindly over open water, desperate to escape. Within 15 minutes, radar screens that had glowed with echoes now showed empty space. It was over before the defenders even saw their enemy. That night, the Americans fired thousands of proximity-fused shells. Their effectiveness shocked even commanders hardened by years of war. Reports later estimated that over 60% of attacking bombers were destroyed or turned back before reaching their targets, an unheard-of figure in conventional flak warfare. And yet the attacks kept coming. The Luftwaffe was desperate. Each new night brought another wave, smaller, faster, lower. Sometimes the radar screens glowed with dozens of signals at once, filling the van with static and noise. Operators worked by instinct and training, adjusting frequencies, switching tracking modes, feeding data through the M9s as fast as their hands could move. The city below slept in uneasy silence, unaware that the entire night sky above them was a duel of mathematics and destruction. For the gunners, there was no rest. Shells were hauled from crates, barrels replaced, relays checked. The ground shook with each volley. By dawn, the sky over Antwerp was filled with smoke, falling debris, and the slow descent of burning aircraft. One after another, the radar echoes faded. Not because the targets had escaped, but because they no longer existed. The radar war had reached its decisive moment. But even as the Americans celebrated their success, the Luftwaffe prepared one last, desperate strike, an attack meant to cripple the Allies before Germany's strength finally collapsed. January 1, 1945, dawn over Western Europe. Fog blanketed the Low Countries. Runways glistened with frost. In airfields across occupied Holland and Western Germany, Luftwaffe ground crews moved in silence, warming engines, loading ammunition, and painting black and white recognition stripes on wings. It was the Luftwaffe's final gamble. Codenamed Operation Bodenplatte, the plan aimed to destroy Allied air power on the ground. A surprise New Year's attack against dozens of airfields in Belgium, the Netherlands, and northern France. For a few brief hours, the skies would once again belong to Germany. At 9 a.m., an Antwerp, by way Antwerp, hundreds of FW-1D-90s and BF-109s roared westward under the mist, flying at treetop level to evade radar. It was a desperate act by a dying force, the last concentrated strike of a Luftwaffe that once ruled Europe's skies. But in Belgium, radar never slept. Near Liège and Antwerp, American SCR-584 units scanned continuously, their antennas turning in slow rhythm, even through the dense morning haze. Though the German fighters flew low, their approach disrupted the radar's pulse patterns. Operators noticed flickering interference, faint, moving returns crawling across the screens. Within minutes, alarms spread across the anti-aircraft network. Gun batteries went to full alert. M9 directors were manned, and fuse setters loaded the deadly VT proximity shells, the same invention that had changed the night battles only weeks earlier. The first Luftwaffe squadrons appeared over the Meuse River, sunlight glinting off their canopies. They were hunting Allied airfields, Y-29, Ash, and Le Culot. But they were already being hunted. From fields and crossroads, from factory roofs and riverbanks, American and British anti-aircraft guns opened fire. Radar made them faster than human eyes could track. The M9 predictors fed real-time data, bearing, elevation, speed, turning chaos into precision. German pilots, expecting surprise, instead flew into a storm of invisible mathematics. Tracerless shells detonated near perfectly, bursts timed not by guesswork, but by radio reflection from the aircraft themselves. FW-190s disintegrated in midair. Others slammed into fields, engines flaming. The air offensive collapsed almost as soon as it began. In just over 2 hours, the Luftwaffe lost nearly 300 aircraft, many of them elite veterans. For most, the return journey never happened. Allied losses were minimal. Bodenplatte meant to cripple Allied air power, instead annihilated the Luftwaffe's last reserves. Radar had done more than detect. It had dictated the outcome. By noon, American radar vans across Belgium stood silent again, their antennas still rotating but their screens mostly empty. The gunners sat exhausted, staring at smoking wreckage scattered across the frozen countryside. Some realized they had just fought the last great German air raid of the war. In the operations records, one officer simply wrote, "Enemy attack destroyed before it could begin." That sentence marked the symbolic end of the Luftwaffe as an offensive force. From that day forward, Germany's skies belonged to the Allies. And for the American gunners who had spent endless nights in the cold, watching radar scopes flicker like heartbeat monitors, it was proof. The invisible could indeed destroy the visible. The war in the air had changed forever. When the smoke cleared over Belgium and the Netherlands, the magnitude of the Luftwaffe's defeat became unmistakable. Wrecked aircraft littered meadows, forests, and frozen canals. Broken Focke-Wulfs, shattered Messerschmitts. Fuselages burned down to bare frames. Civilians awoke to the sound of explosions fading in the distance and found the morning sky strangely quiet. In Allied command posts from Brussels to London, reports came in through radio teletype. Massive enemy losses. Situation under control. It was the first day of 1945, and the Allies had entered the new year with an invisible advantage that had just proven itself beyond question. Radar had not merely defended the skies, it had ended Germany's last hope for air superiority. The numbers told the story between dawn and midday. The Luftwaffe lost an estimated 271 aircraft destroyed and 65 more damaged beyond repair. Nearly 250 trained pilots were killed or captured. irreplaceable men from squadrons already running on fuel shortages and desperate conscription. By contrast, Allied air forces lost fewer than 50 aircraft, most destroyed on the ground before radar guns responded. In strategic terms, the ratio was catastrophic. Germany could no longer replace its aircraft or its veteran pilots. Factories in Bavaria and Saxony were already under constant bombardment. Aviation fuel was nearly gone. Even if the Germans had rebuilt their squadrons, there was no longer a safe corridor to train them. The radar defense network had made sure of that. The silent weapon that changed the war, and official after-action reports. Allied commanders credited radar-directed anti-aircraft artillery with a decisive role in repelling Bodenplatte. The SCR-584 system, once doubted as too complex for field use, had proven both rugged and precise. At the peak of the battle, its radar locks guided 90mm shells within a margin of 30 yards at 20,000 feet, an accuracy unheard of only 2 years earlier. The proximity fuse, the so-called VT shell, completed the transformation. Instead of relying on visual bursts, shells now exploded automatically when their miniature radio receivers detected a metallic target nearby. Together, radar and VT fuses created what one observer called a curtain of mathematical fire. For the U.S. Army Air Forces and the Royal Artillery, the psychological impact was immediate. Crews who had endured months of relentless night raids finally saw evidence that technology could outthink terror. Confidence surged across the Western Front. The human side of victory among the radar operators, the triumph felt subdued. They were technicians, not frontline soldiers. Many had never seen the men they'd fought, only the blips that represented them. After the battle, several units were ordered to recover wreckage for technical intelligence. They found twisted cockpits and personal effects, flight maps, photos, and letters home, scattered among the debris. It reminded them that the war's new face, though electronic, was still deeply human. One lieutenant from a radar battery near Antwerp wrote in his journal, "I watched the echoes fade and thought, those were lives ending. I wonder if they ever saw us." Yet, there was also pride. Their sleepless nights of calibration, the endless hum of generators, the frozen hands adjusting dials, all had led to this moment when the Luftwaffe was broken not by numbers, but by precision. The invisible war had been won through logic, discipline, and invention, and as Allied commanders looked toward Germany's borders, they realized radar had done more than defend the sky. It had opened the path for the final invasion of the Reich itself. The Tweede victory over Bodenplatte marked more than the end of a battle. It signaled a permanent shift in modern warfare. Radar, once a secretive experiment buried in laboratories, had become the cornerstone of Allied power. Within weeks of the new year, the radar defense network in Western Europe evolved into something even greater, a continental system of eyes and coordination. The same SCR-584s that had guarded Antwerp and Liège were redeployed to guide Allied bomber streams and direct night fighter patrols over the Rhine. By February 1945, radar units worked seamlessly with the Royal Air Force's GCI, Ground Control Intercept stations, linking British, American, and Canadian forces under one unified detection web. What had begun as scattered outposts of technical innovation had grown into an electronic fortress stretching from the Channel to the Ardennes. Germany's final blindness for the Luftwaffe. The contrast was devastating. Radar stations in northern France and the Low Countries, once German strongholds, were now silent ruins. The Würzburg and Freya systems that had guided their night fighters were either captured, bombed, or jammed beyond use. German operators who once monitored Allied bomber streams now faced radio silence and confusion. Even in Germany's heartland, radar screens showed more interference than signals, a result of Allied jamming operations and the total collapse of communication lines. In late March, as the Allies crossed the Rhine, German flak units reported receiving radar data several minutes late, or not at all. They were effectively blind. Meanwhile, American counter-battery radar, like the SCR-584 and SCR-602, was being used offensively to track German artillery, coordinate crossing operations, and even direct air support in real time. The reversal was complete. The same technology that had protected London and Antwerp was now helping to tear down the walls of Germany itself. The strategic transformation for the U.S. Army and Navy. Radar had changed the rules of war. In the Pacific, destroyers equipped with SG and SP radar were repelling kamikaze attacks with the same precision that the European gunners had demonstrated over Belgium. In Europe, radar-controlled bombing missions using H-2X Mickey sets allowed American B-17s to strike targets even through heavy overcast. The Luftwaffe's last hope had been surprise. Radar had made surprise obsolete. General Omar Bradley summarized it simply in his after-action report for January 1945. The enemy struck blind and we saw everything. His words captured the essence of modern warfare. Information had become as deadly as firepower. When the war ended 4 months later, the lessons of radar spread faster than any weapon before it. American engineers collected German radar technology, compared designs, and found that while German sets were elegant, they lacked the rugged mobility of Allied systems. The Americans had built for war in the field, not in laboratories. Radar became the foundation for the early Cold War, leading to air traffic control, weather forecasting, and missile defense. But its true beginning, its moment of undeniable power, came in the frozen dawn of January 1945, when American gunners used invisible signals to erase the last German strike before it could even reach them. In every after-action report, in every logbook from those radar vans scattered across Belgium, the conclusion was the same. The age of the invisible battlefield had begun. The story of radar in World War II is not one of noise or spectacle. It is a story of silence. It was the hum of a generator in a frozen field, the soft sweep of a green beam across glass, the quiet discipline of men who fought with mathematics instead of bullets. When history remembers the Second World War, it often recalls the tanks of Normandy, the bombers over Berlin, or the Marines on Iwo Jima. Yet behind every visible victory stood an invisible one. A network of scientists, engineers, and soldiers who turned physics into protection. Radar changed more than the outcome of battles. It changed the meaning of warfare itself. For the first time, victory did not depend solely on bravery or numbers, but on perception, on the ability to see what others could not. The American radar gunners who watched the skies over Antwerp, Liège, and Bastogne did not see themselves as heroes. They were technicians, problem solvers, and caretakers of a new kind of defense. But when the Luftwaffe's last strike fell apart under their unseen aim, the world crossed an invisible threshold, from industrial war to electronic war. Long after the guns fell silent, the principles they refined would shape every conflict that followed, from Korea to the Cold War. The screens grew brighter, the echoes clearer. But the lesson remained the same. Those who master the unseen master the sky.